And now we're on Daf Beis Amud Beis. If the Torah had not added the word echad, it says aid. Aid is in the singular, so I didn't have to add the word echad, which becomes a redundant word. So why did the Torah add the word echad? This is going to teach me something about elsewhere when the word echad is not mentioned to define aid as one aid, but rather the Torah just used the word aid is that the word aid always refers to two aidim, just like it did in the parsha in Dvarim, where it says aid echad. So from this extra word, echad, because it could have said aid, we're going to derive the conclusion that the word aid means edus, the entity or the unit of edus, and edus is two witnesses, and that's what the word aid means. Aid equals edus equals two aid. When the Torah is interested in one aid, then it will say aid echad. And now the Brisa concludes by explaining the drasha. The Omar Achmana, the Torah says in the parsha of Sotah, the aid einba trei lespe, which means the word aid we said equals two. So what does it mean there are no two aidim? Elachat, there's only one aid. And then it says vilonit fasa, which means that she's asur al baila. Why? Because lo nitfasa, she was not raped, but rather she entered into this escapade with her full ratzon, hadas, and she's asura. So we see that Eid Echad is believed to testify that she had this tumah. So it's interesting. You know, when you first read the words Eid Einba, you get the impression that we don't have enough evidence. But really, the Eid Einba means this is evidence, because Eid means two Eidim but one Eid, and that is the reliable evidence. So the Gemara has the following kasha now. This is after the Brisa is finished. The Gemara says, "Ela time lo yokum eid echad be'ish." How do you know that the word aid in the parsha of Sotah means two aidim? You can only derive it from the pasuk lo yokum eid echad be'ish. Olav hachi. Now, the Gemara is now going to do an analysis of the havamina, meaning what conclusion would we have arrived at if not for the pasuk lo yokum eid echad be'ish? Havamina aid this Sotah. Chadhu, when the Torah says Eid Einba, it means one Eid. And it's only from the Yokum Eid Echad Be'ish that we're going to derive that it means two Eid. So Chadhu, right? So Eid Einba means Chadhu. Ve'i afilu leka chada, chada leka is elamai mitzvah. The pasuk says V'hilon nitfasa, which we said means that she's asur al baila. How could it be she's asur al baila without any aidin? So this entire havamina that the aid einba should be interpreted literally as there's not even one aid is nonsensical, because the Torah goes on to say she's asur al baila. How could she be asura in the absence of aidin? And there are no aidin, not even one aid. It's true. If I need the drasha, the Gemara answers from lo yokum eid echad be'ish, in order to teach me that aid in Sotah means two aidim. I would have thought, this is again, this whole sugya that we're learning now is about a havamina, to explain the havamina and why we need lo yokum eid echad to exclude that havamina. So the havamina would be that aid ein ba she'ein neman ba. That when the Torah is saying that aid ein ba, and we're interpreting to mean one aid, it's telling me not that there is no aid, but that we cannot rely on an aid, Just 1 second. We cannot rely on an aid. Yeah, we cannot rely on the testimony of one single aid, but rather we require 2 aid. I have to underline this, sorry. So now we have the equation to the pasuk of lo yokum eid echad, and that's going to teach me that aid ein ba means there are no 2 aidim, but we do rely, in fact, on 1 aid, and she's asura. So the Gemara asks, is it really possible to accept such an interpretation of the pasuk that aid ein ba is telling me that you don't rely on the testimony of 1 aid, but rather you need 2 aidim? Ein neman ba, so that the Torah is coming to tell me that 1 aid is not relied upon. Well, my boy adi katre, but rather the Torah is telling me we need 2 aidim. Is that lishto kra mine? Why did the Torah b'chalal have to tell me that we rely on 2 aidim and we don't rely on 1 aid to generate an Israel baila? You could have left that all out. The Asya David Mimam. We have a famous Gzeira Shava that it says Lo Yakum Eid Echad Beish L'chol Avon Al Pi Shnei Eidim etc. Yakum Davar. And in the parsha of Znus, it says in Kitetse, it says Ki Motza B'Erev Has Davar. So in both places, the word Davar is there. And we have this famous Gzeira Shava of Davar Mimamon to teach me that just like in Mammon, we need 2 witnesses, so too in a Davar Shabbat we need 2 witnesses. And this is the principle of Ein Davar Shabbat Pachs Mishnayim. So if the Torah is coming to tell me Ein Ba because we need 2 Eidim, that's something that we would have assumed even had the Torah not told us that, because we know that there's a Gzeira Shava of Davar Mimamon requiring 2 Eidim in Davar Shabbat. I know already now, even without this drasha, that you need 2 Eidim, meaning that we derive from the Gzeira Shava that Eidus means 2 witnesses, Sai and Dini Momenos, and Sai in a Davar Shabbat. And therefore, since the pasuk of Eid Ein Ba can't be telling me that the testimony of 1 aid is not reliable, because that would be my intuitive upfront assumption in any event. So we're going to have to interpret the Eid Ein Ba is what we call a Sipur HaDavar. In other words, the Torah is saying the Eid Ein Ba, there's no one testifying about her that she had a Maises Nus, that she was Tmeah. So now, if that be the case, we go back to our original kasha. Why did the Bryce have to derive from the Pasuk Yokum Eid Echad Be'ish that the word aid in the parsha of Sotah is referring to 2 Eidim? Even without that, we would have to interpret the Pasuk in that way, because if the Pasuk was referring to Echad Eino Meid Ba, why is she Asura if there's no witnessing? So Gemara answers Itzrich, we need the derivation for Lo Yakum Eid Echad, because without it we would interpret the pasuk of Eid Ein Ba here in Sotah, that the Torah is coming to teach us that a single witness is not to be relied on, but rather we need 2 Eidim. And even though you'll tell me that that's so because Torah Kula, we have the Gzeira Shava Davar Davar, so why did the Torah have to tell me this? It's Salkadat Kamina Sotah Shiny. I might think that 1 aid is reliable with regard to Sotah. And why is Sotah different? Diraglaim L'Davar. We have a basis and a svara to say that she had znus. There's enough suspicion here. Sharei Kino Love and Istara. I mean, there definitely was Kinu, which means that he suspected her of znus, and there was definitely Stira, and she violated his Kinu. That creates Raglaim L'Davar. And therefore, I would think that Heiman ba eid echad, that we should rely on the testimony of one single witness. So we now understand why the Brisa needs the Yalfus of Lo Yokum Eid Echad B'ish, because in the absence of that limud, we would have thought that the Torah is coming to teach us that even though in Sotah there's Reglaim L'Davar Shenitba, nevertheless we have a principle, a hard, ironclad principle of Ein Davar Shebe'er B'Poks Mishnayim. So therefore, the testimony of one aid would not be reliable in a Davar Shebe'er, but we need two aidim in all, like in all adios, basically. But now that we're darshaning Lo Yokum Eid Echad B'ish, that whenever it says aid, it means two people, right? That's called Eidus, an entity of Eidus. So therefore, when it says Eid Ein Ba, it means that there are no two witnesses to testify, but rather there's only one witness, and therefore we are going to believe one witness. The Gemara now comes back to ask a kasha on this answer, that we need the drasha of Lo Yokum Eid Echad, because if not, we would have said that Eid Ein Ba means that Eid Echad is not Neman, but rather you need Shnayim. And you would have had to have me that Eid Echad is Neman because of Reglaim L'Davar. Frek the Gemara, Mi Matzis Amrit. How could you possibly interpret the pasuk of Eid Ein Ba? The Ein Neman Ba, that one aid is not believed based on your Havmin of Reglaim L'Davar, Visharya, and this woman would be Muteris Labaila if one single witness testifies about her znus, and the Torah is coming to be Mekil on her. For Midich Siv, it says in the next pasuk, Vilonit Fasa, that she was not raped, but rather she was Nevelis Beratzon, so she's not an Anusa Vichlal, the Asura. We see that the Torah intended to tell us that she's Asura. Because if the Torah was coming to say Muteres, why would it have to say that she's not an Anusa? She's Muteres. It doesn't make any sense. Because she's Muteres, whether she's an Anusa or not. But for sure, the Torah is telling us that in a situation where we see clearly that she had this Be'ila, she was Nitma, and the Torah is saying that it has to be Baratzon, and then she's Asura, but if it was Ba'ones, she's not Asura. So the Gemara answers, it's true. We need the pasuk Lo Yokum Eid Echad B'ish, because in its absence, Al Kedai Kamin, I would have thought that when it says V'eid Ein Ba, it means Ein Neman Ba Adika Trey, one witness is not believed, but rather we need two witnesses, and that we see that we're talking about Asur al Bail because it says Vilonit Fasa. So it means Ein Neman Ba Eid until you have two Eidim. And Hilonit Fasa, she's only Tmeya. If she had this be a Baratzon, not Be'ones, is therefore Kemash Malon. The Bryce wants to teach us based on the pasuk Lo Yokum Eid Echad B'ish that Eid in the pasuk, when it says it's Stam, it's referring to the Eidus of two Eidim, and therefore when it says Eid Ein Ba, it doesn't mean that Eid Echad is not Neman Ba, but rather it means that even though there were no two Eidim to testify that she had the tumah, that she had this nus, there was only one Eid, nevertheless he's believed in order to generate an Isur. So now we get to Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua Omer, we learned through the Mishnah Makani Law Al Pi Shnai, and also we need not only two Eidim for the Kinu, but also for the Stira. My time with the Rabbi Yeshua, why does he require two Eidim for both Kinu and Stira? The Gemara explains that from the pasuk the Eid Ein Ba, from which we derived that one aid is believed for Tumah, it means only for Tumah do we rely on one aid, but not for Kini and Stira. There we need two aidim. Omakra ba, and the extra word ba in Tumah is telling me that only as far as Tumah we could believe one aid, v'lo b'kina, v'lo b'stira. However, Rabbi Eliezer Omer ba, Rabbi Eliezer, who says that you only need two aidim for Kinui but not for Stira, he's saying ba, meaning that one aid is relied dafka in the case of Tumah, but v'lo b'kinui. But as far as Kinui is concerned, we need two aidim. But he's not going to go a step further, as Rabbi Yeshua did, and apply the ba to stira. And therefore he holds that as far as the stira is concerned, all you need is one aid. And in that sense, stira, according to Rabbi Eliezer, is exactly equivalent to Tumah. So the Gemara asks, raises the objection to Rabbi Eliezer, V'ema, and why don't you say ba v'lo b'stira? You know that ba is an exclusion to tell you that you require two eidim. Why do you assume it's an exclusion to kinui, and kinui requires two eidim? Maybe it's an exclusion to stira as well as kinui, and kinui and stira both would not be. We would not rely on one aid. So my answer is stira iskash l'tuma. We only have a hekesh between stira and tuma. And what that hekesh is going to teach me is that stira only requires one aid. In the same pasuk, it mentions stira and tuma. So just like one aid is believed for tuma, meaning for the ma'ases nus, to generate an isa, so too, one aid is believed to testify in the stira. So Gemara asks, wait a second. Kinui nami is kishlutum. We have a hekesh not only between Tumah and Stira, but also a hekesh between Tumah and Kinui. So why don't you derive from this hekesh that even in the case of Kinui, one aid is sufficient, like it is in Tumah? The Gemara says, "Lo ha mi'et rachmana ba." Yeah, okay, fine. So we have a mi'et of ba, and Rabbi Eliezer is going to assume that the mi'et of ba refers to Kinui. Why? Why can't it refer to Stira, my chazis, or my ra'isa? Why are you being machmir in Stira and equating it with Tumah and relying on and defining the sufficient testimony as one aid, and then you're being makel in Kinui, that Kinui is nothing unless there were two aidim, and you're going to use the word ba to teach me that aid echad is not believed, mistabra. Oh, so that's the question. And Gemara answers, mistabra stira difa shekena osarta kituma, that we're going to be more machmir towards creating an isur and assuming that there was nus in the case and relying on one aid, dafka in the case of stira, because what generates the isur of the znus? It's the stira itself. It's not the kinu, it's the stira. So therefore, we should be more machmer in stira, because stira is the generator of the isur's nus of tuma. Well, what's stira worth? Kinu yadif shekeni ikar shegaramla. What is the meaning of stira? It has no significance whatsoever, unless there was a kinu. So stira itself does not generate the isur, but rather it's the stira that's built upon of kinui. So kinui, we should be more machmer in kinui and say that since kinui is really what ultimately causes this whole downfall, this whole domino theory, this avalanche, is therefore the Torah should rely on one aid with regard to kinui. So at this point, the Gemara is really baffled as to why Rabbi Eliezer maintains that ba is coming to exclude kinui, and teaching me that kinui requires two eidim, why not use ba for stira? And therefore, kinui, which is the ikar, I mean, everything is, the generator of this whole process is kinui, and that chumrah of kinui should make it equal to tuma, and therefore one aid would be sufficient. And that's the exact opposite of Rabbi Eliezer. So Gemara answers, he loves stira kinui meika. Well, were you telling me that you need kinu to set up stira? But what's the kinu worth if there's no stira? Kinu doesn't generate any isur. And kinu is just an expression of his suspicion. But it's the stira and only the stira that generates the isur. So therefore, it's more likely and logical that we should be machmir in the case of stira, which is the actual generator befall of the isur's nus. And therefore, we should reduce the testimony from 2 to 1 aid, as opposed to kinui, which is not a generator of an isur. This whole sugya reminds me, Rabbi, of a machlokas Beisil Beit Shammai about Yaknahaz. You know what I mean? So, where should the yayin come and where should the Mekadesh the Shabbos come? On the one hand, there's no kiddush without yayin, but on the other hand, yayin is only to set up the kiddush. It reminds me a little also of the Gemara we learned yesterday, B'siyam Masechet and does here. What's more important, the bracha or the amen? Sometimes you have a sequence and you can always vacillate as to which is more important. I mean, the end result is at the bottom of the list. It's the forward sequence, but on the other hand, that's built on the shoulders of what came before it. So the Gemara asks me, "Lav kinui stira mahanim." Once again, we're going to ask the question: without kinui, what is stira? So maybe we should be more machmer in kinui because it's actually kinui that sets up the stira, and therefore, why does Rabbi Lezer equate tuma with stira? He should be equating tuma with kinui. And therefore, the Torah be machmir and rely on the testimony of one witness. And Gemara answers, even though there's no stira without kinui, but nevertheless, it's actually the stira, which is the beginning of the process of znus, or the ma'aser znus, and therefore, it's like tuma. So the tuma is just a hemshech of the stira. And therefore, it's more logical to equate stira to tuma, or let's say, stira to tuma, and believe Heid Echad, because stira is in fact the beginning of tuma. Okay. Now the Gemara is going to prove that there's another alternative tradition about the Shita of Rabbi Eliezer, alternative to our Mishnah. Masisa Loki Aitana Desanya. So here we're going to learn the sugya of Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda has a different transmission of Rabbi Eliezer, according to which Makani li ishto, Makani al pi echad, or al pi atzmo. Our tradition of Rabbi Eliezer in our Mishnah is Rabbi Eliezer requires 2 eidim for kinui. And this tradition of Rabbi Yossi is that Rabbi Eliezer allows for 1 eid for kinui, and not only that, even if the Baal says, I gave a kinui, there's no support to his claim, nevertheless, we're going to accept it as testimony on the kinui, which means that if she was so sad of the kinui, she'll have to drink from the mei merorim umashkala, al pi shnayim. But the steer itself will require 2 eidim. And now the Bryce is going to record the back and forth between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yossi. Heishivu Chachamim l'divrei Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, ein l'davar sof. According to your Rabbi Yossi's interpretation of Rabbi Eliezer, any time a person gets angry at his wife, he's going to claim that he gave us kinui, and nobody knows about it because the kinui was beino lebeino, between he and her. Because we're saying now that according to this tradition or transmission of Rabbi Eliezer holds that al pi atzmo, there's no need for any edus at all on kinui. So the Gemara now asks, my time of the Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, right? Why does he hold that when the pasuk says v'eid ein ba, and from that we learn that 1 aid is neman on tuma, we're going to exclude the edus of stira. Amar kra ba v'lo b'stira. So v'ein aid ba, meaning that 1 aid is sufficient, but only for tuma, but not for stira. So again, the old kasha, v'ema ba v'lo b'kinui. Why does Rabbi Yossi assume that in kinui all you need is 1 witness? Maybe ba is telling me that in tuma 1 aid is sufficient, but not in kinui, and kinui requires 2 aid. And you're going to answer me, kinui is kash lituma. Well, I'm going to answer you, stira nami is kish lituma. So even in stira, we should believe 1 witness, because this equation between stira and tuma. And the Gemara answers that Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion, ahu lekama shir stira. That pasuk, or shall we say more accurately, that hekesh is teaching me what is the shir of stira, which is namely kidei tuma hudios. So that's why we need a hekesh between stira to tuma to teach me the shir zman of stira has to be equal in order to generate an Yisrael Baila to the time it takes lovely day tuma, meaning for a beer. Now the Brisa records that Ishivu Chachamim, the Chachamim said to Rabbi Yossi, the dear Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda ein l'davar sof. Ma'aninu, what does it mean, ein l'davar sof? What is the argument of the Chachamim? The Zinid al-Kani, he really did not give kinui, he's bluffing. Fi Omar, when he gets angry, he's going to say, Kanoi, I gave her kino. I was makana. I gave her kino. And nobody could contradict him, because according to Rabbi Yossi's tradition of Rabbi Eliezer, he's believed Bein Ola Vein Ah. And now what's going to happen is that because he got angry at her, he's going to fabricate this whole story, and it's going to be such that he'll find 2 Eidim that she went into a private room with so and so, and it's as if she violated a kinu, which she never got a kinu, but he who imtziat a kinu, he invented it. So in truth, he did not give her kinu. He did not warn her from stira. But it's very easy for him to find Eidim on the stira. So the Gemara asks, from the fact that the Rabbanon, the Chachamim, answered or objected to Rabbi Yossi, it means that Hola Mishnah Seinu, in our Mishnah, even according to Rabbi Eliezer, Yesh L'Davar Sof. Whoa, why is Yesh L'Davar Sof? Let's raise the same objection. The Zimna Delo is Tater, maybe she didn't have stira. V'yomer is Tater. And he's bluffing and he's lying and he says, because he's angry at her, that she had stira. And you don't need Eidim on the stira, so therefore it's ain't L'Davar Sof. So whenever the Baal gave us stira, he's relied upon to testify and Asar al Baila, just because he got angry at her. Gemara answers, Rabbi Yisrael, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yochanan, Afla de Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda ein l'davar sof. So it means that even on Rabbi Eliezer, in our Mishnah, the same objection could be raised. That ain't l'dover sof. So Gemara asks, what do you mean? Afle divrei Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, below me boile Mishnah saying. On Rabbi Eliezer and our Mishnah, we don't need to interpret that this was the objection. It's pashut. The Brisa wants to mechadish that even according to Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, there's a difficulty. So the Gemara says, Adarab, it's just the opposite. The Mishnah Seinu Ikar. In our Mishnah, there's a basis to say that a Sotah, where at the very beginning of the process of becoming a Sotah, we started with Kinui, that took place in front of two Eidim. So it's not something that he does mitokas. So therefore it's less logical to be Choshesh here that he's lying because of his anger to say that she had a stira. But Hassam, here's where the problem is. According to Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda's record, Leka Ikar. There's no basis for the Eidim. Because according to his Shita, he doesn't need to be Makana in front of two Eidim. So we don't know about the Kini except from his word. And therefore, there's more of a reason to assume or to at least suspect that he's lying. And when he's lying, when he's angry at her, it's very easy for him to say, well, I gave a kina. And he'll find many times, many occasions in which he was nistera. So Gemara answers, Eli Yitmar, Hachi Yitmar. Omer Rab Yitzchak, Bar Yosef, Omer Rab Yochanan, L'divrei Rab Yosef, Rab Yehuda, V'afla Mishnah Seinu Ein L'davar Sof. Not only according to Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that you don't need any basis at all for the beginning of Eidim, meaning you don't need Eidim even for the Kinui, and therefore we're going to ask the question of Eidim Davar Sof. But even according to Rabbi Eliezer, the way it was recorded in our Mishnah, he could still make up a whole, fabricate the whole story and say Nistera, because you don't need two Eidim on the Stira. So now, according to this opinion that Kinui is meaningful even without Eidim, is Amar Rab Chanina Misura Lo Lema Inishli. It's to say a person should be very careful. Bisman Hazeh, when there's no Hashkas Sotah to prove her innocence, he should not say to be careful. Lo Tisteri Bahari Ploni, because Dilma Kaimalon Ki Rab Yossi Rab Yehuda, who says that Kinui is Chal Piatzmo, even without Eidim. And now we have to suspect that maybe she violated his kinui, who was tatra, and she had steer b'edim. Now we're in trouble. Leka in the Sotah lemivdike uka asale lave isura liola. So we got up to Omer Lakish, and the Mirza Hashem, that will be our limud for Shabbos. So I'll thank you for the whole week and wish you a great Shabbos. Shabbos Hagol, great Shabbos.